Hey guys, welcome to this mini training. Today I'm going to show you how I take these softer arch brows and turn them into a straighter brow using a lamination wax and stain service. So here we are taking our cleanser, it's the GG cleanser, and we're wiping away any makeup and cleansing any dead skin. This is really important to make sure that we're working on a clean canvas. Then here I'm going in and trimming the long hairs that are kind of like sticking out here. Usually when I'm pre-trimming, I don't cut too much just to be safe, and we can always fix that at the end. Next, we are taking our Thuya solution and making sure that we saturate the entire brow. And here I'm using my lip applicator to work that in. Keep in mind that you'll want to keep a stopwatch in. And you also want to consider her hair type, and because she is more of a medium to like fine hair type, we're gonna keep the solution on for probably like 10 minutes or so. Then we're gonna add our plastic wrap and just allow for our solution to sit, and we're just stretching the brows. You can do this with an interdental brush or with a lip applicator, and usually I like to check the hairs about every 2 to 3 minutes, being really gentle, so that way we're not like scratching the surface of the skin. And here I'm just taking it a little bit further and stretching it a little bit more with the interdental brush and just pressing really lightly, because this can scratch the skin super easily and irritate it. So here I'm just working that solution in a little bit more. You can see the hair stretching. You can tell when it pretty much sits in that direction without you having to, try too hard to pull it. And then we are wiping that with a damp cotton round, an aesthetic wipe in this case. And then we are applying our second solution, which is the setting solution, and then working that in with a brand new lip applicator. You want to make sure that you don't use the same one. And then it takes about 30 seconds to apply it to each brow. And then we're stretching that into our desired direction. It's really important that we get it into that direction as quickly as possible, since this is the setting solution. Whereas with the first solution, it really doesn't matter how you stretch it or the direction that you stretch it in. And then we're just cleaning up any of the excess on the bottom. I don't touch the top so we don't end up creasing the tops. And then here I'm taking my plastic wrap, and we're just gonna let that sit for the same amount of time as the first solution, just because we don't need to stretch the hairs with the interdental brush the second time. Then I'm wiping the remainder of that solution off with the aesthetic wipe. And then now we're going to map. So she had requested for a much straighter brow, so here I'm going in with the front line. Sometimes I like to alternate between the middle and the fronts first. It just depends on my mood. And then I go into more depth on this inside my online course, because it's important to know why you're placing the lines. So since we are creating a straighter brow, your angle is going to change. So we're bringing that down on the bottom to be a little bit straighter in terms of the horizontal line. We're not going to have that at a diagonal. And if you guys need details and visuals of what that looks like, I do go over the 8 main brow shades and how to create that and all kinds of practices inside my signature Badass Brows course. So here we are doing the tail and the arch more on the outside of the brow, and then placing that bottom line a little bit further, so that way we can make sure her brows end up straighter. Whereas with an arch, you'd have that at a slightly more lifted angle. So we want to bring that downwards a little bit more. That way there's not as much arch. So we're doing the same thing on the other side. And then she wanted to remove some of her tail, so that way it was, if you think about a straight line going from the front to the tail, it's almost even or slightly lifted above the front of the brow. That way, that's what creates that upward direction when it comes, I guess you could say like that upward snatch direction when it comes to the tail, right? So we want that slightly above the front, and that's what's going to give it that straighter, more upward look. And then she asked also for me to kind of like cut off a little bit of her fronts. That way they don't dip downwards at an angle. She wanted it really straight across, okay? So we're working that mapping string in. And again, you guys want to double check your work sitting up. I show you guys in the course, the difference between mapping laying down and sitting up, and what that looks like, because it's super important. Since we're working from behind, it always looks different when you sit up, right? So here we are working the stain into the brow, and we're keeping she wanted to keep the color really natural. So we're only going about like 1.5 shades darker. And I'm using my go-to formula of taupe mixed with a drop of dark rose since she has a cooler undertone. And again, I go into all of that inside the signature course, and I'm using my wide angle brush, which is linked in the product guide below. This is my favorite brush of all time. I feel like you can work the product in really quickly, and we're starting at the middle to the tail because that's the part we want to be the darkest. And then we're gonna use what's remaining on the brush to work that into the front using a softer pressure as we work our way to the front. That way the front is even more translucent, and typically I like to work at the bottom first and then drag my brush upwards to use the rest of that to meet the top of the brow. Okay, so we're gonna do that again, and then you can continue to build layers if you want it to be a little bit darker. And I'm just working that line to make sure that's nice and crisp, because I like the bottom of my brow to be the darkest part as well as the tail, and then kind of just working that product in towards the top so that way it's softer. This is pretty much why clients book with me. They love a more natural look. Now keep in mind that when you go a little bit natural or more on the natural side, the client's tint and stain probably won't last more than a few days, especially if they are on the oilier side. So that's just something that you want to make sure you guys communicate, okay? And then I'm taking our micro swab here with a little bit of cleanser to make sure that we clean up those edges as quickly as possible, especially since she's more fair skin, medium fair skin. We don't want that to process in the wrong areas. And then here I am removing the stain and with a damp aesthetic wipe. And then while the other one processes, we're gonna go in with some wax. And here I am using the Brow Code wax, and this is amazing wax, you guys. I've been using this for years now, and though the shipping is pretty expensive, I say it's worth it because it really picks up on those fine hairs and you don't waste a lot of time tweezing, right? So as long as you're using enough pressure, you really don't have to deal with over tweezing. You just gotta make sure that you really find your flow and your pressure, which again, I do go over inside Badass Brows. You guys get a whole tutorial and module on waxing if you feel like you have not mastered hard wax. That is my go-to for every client, especially since we have a lot of clients in Vegas that do a lot of med spa treatments, things like that. So I rarely use soft wax anymore. Though sometimes for a client that has really tough brows, it is good to know both, right? So here I'm just going back in and I'm using a little bit I'm creating a little layer at the bottom so that way that bottom line is sharper because it was a little bit more faded when I removed it. And then I'm going in with my tweezers and doing detail work, which again, like if you guys want a more specific tutorial on that and how to remove the hairs and how to pay attention to how they grow in rows, all of that is going to be inside BAB, okay? So here we're just going in and defining the brow, tweezing up any areas that are not that don't fall on the line, and then we're gonna take our last step and we're gonna work this into the brow to rehydrate the hairs, and we're gonna keep that for 24 hours. And then we're gonna remove any excess with an aesthetic wipe it off of our glove, and then we're gonna style it. So here I'm just using a aesthetic wipe to pat it off the skin. You want to make sure that you don't remove all of it though. We just don't want it super, super shiny. And you still want to make sure those hairs are pretty saturated, okay? So I'm using mascara wand, but again, you can work, I find it a little bit easier to use an interdental brush since it's a little bit more compact and tighter. But sometimes I switch back and forth between that and a mascara wand, okay? So here I'm styling it. And she likes them a little bit more combed over, so we're going to make sure that the front stay at a slight, I would say like 70-degree angle. And as we work our way to the middle, it's going to go down to like 45. And then at the tail, you're hitting 0. Like we want that tail to be pretty flush, right? So I'm working a little bit more product in because I accidentally wiped off a little bit too much here. So we want to make sure again that those brows are pretty saturated. So that way, it has time to really sit. And then I took my smaller brush here, and we're gonna just restyle it. And then at this point, you guys, if you see that any hairs are too long, you can always go back in with some scissors and cut that down. And again, I show you guys how to do that in detail, millimeter by millimeter, zoomed in inside the courses. So if you guys find this very valuable, you can imagine all of the details that are inside that course. So here I'm going in and just making sure that all the hairs are nice and even and nice and flush. So this is really what makes it. Some artists really like to trim down a lot. I would say I try to trim down as least as possible unless their hairs are really thick or their brows are naturally really thick. That way they're not like shockingly huge. But yeah, I like to keep them slightly trimmed. And I'll usually do it before, like you guys saw in the beginning of the video, and then after they're stretched out. But you want to be careful not to cut them down too much, because once that solution comes off, when the hairs fall down, that could create a lot of holes. So just be mindful, like when you guys are stretching the hairs, how much you really trim off, because once that goes back into its normal position, once the cream comes off, it could really end up looking choppy, which I've seen from other artists, or looking, creating holes. Then I'm gently pushing the tips of her hairs down because she wants more of a tame look. And there is a difference between a fluffier lamination where you keep the hairs up and a tamed down look. And then I'm taking my buff brows. I think it's like one of the lighter concealers, one of the first two, and I mix them together. And in here, I'm taking my square angle brush that is in the same set. Again, in my product guide, you guys will see the two brushes that I recommend for the tint application as well as the concealer application. They come in the set together. And then I'm blending it out. You could use your finger or you can use a lip applicator. Just again, it depends on my mood. And I'm using what's remaining on the brush to make sure that we snatch up that top of the brow, okay? And here I'm just brushing it all the way down to the tail and blending that out. Really, really gently. I don't like for the concealer to be super visible. You can see it matches her perfectly. And that is it, you guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments below.